Hi, folks. I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable with you today. If you've watched any of my other videos, you might be able to tell that my voice is about an octave deeper than normal. I should be doing my outgoing voicemail with this voice, and the reason is that I am sick. I have a pretty severe, I'm getting better from a pretty severe cold. I was a little worried about COVID in the beginning. I have been exposed to multiple people who later tested positive with COVID, and the incubation period was about right. But I've taken 2 COVID tests, and both are negative. And not that I'm concerned that I would not get through it, but I, don't want to expose anybody else. Don't want to have to quarantine if I don't have to. Although I'm, even with a really bad cold, I'm really careful about not spreading my germs to other people. I, fortunately have masks around from the period of time when masking was all the rage, and will wear masks when I go into stores and things while I have a cold. Nice thing to do, maybe, right? Not spread my cold to other people who may be worried that they have COVID. So I thought, what a great opportunity to answer the question, does shamanic healing work? Here I am, a shamanic practitioner and a teacher, and I've got a bad cold. Shouldn't I just heal myself and get well? So the question, does shamanic healing work, is an interesting one. It comes up a lot, and that's the reason why I'm answering this. And if you ask me, because I am a shamanic healer, of course I'm going to say yes. That's like asking a surgeon, does surgery work? Or asking an herbologist, does herbal medicine work? Of course I'm going to say yes. But I'm going to give you a relatively nuanced answer. Now, why do I get sick? If I'm a shamanic healer and shamanic healing works, why am I not immortal and not ever getting sick? So let's talk about how shamanic healing works. I have experienced shamanic healing for many years, both on both sides of the equation, on both from my own side and the other side. And I want to talk about the different kinds of shamanic healing, different things that shamanism is good for healing. One, we can talk about physical ailments, like a cold, like COVID, like my daughter had 2 infections simultaneously. Poor kid, she was quite miserable. One was bacterial and one was viral, and she was hit her really hard. So there's that. There's sort of physical level healing stuff, but there's also mental, emotional, and spiritual level healing stuff. So when we go through trauma, or when we have emotional difficulty, when we're going through grief, that sort of thing. And grief is not a condition. Grief is a process. It's not something you need to be healed from. It is uncomfortable. Parts of it are incredibly unpleasant. But somebody should not be taking your grief away from you. Anyway, how shamanic healing works, the way that I describe it to people is that shamanic healing addresses the spiritual aspects of healing. As humans, we are complex. We have a body, a mind, and a spirit, and a soul, and etheric body, and an energy body, and yada, yada, yada. All right? I have a respiratory system, which is, giving me a little bit of trouble at the moment. I got the sniffles, I've got chest congestion, I had a sore throat. It's gone away now. But I'm healing rather rapidly, and part of that is the shamanic work that I'm doing. So shamanism addresses the spiritual components of that. Now, there is overlap between all of our various components, right? So we cannot completely separate out body and mind, nor can you separate out spirit and mind, or mind and body, or spirit and body, or any combination of those things. They overlap, they interpenetrate. The divisions between them are relatively artificial. Now, I know if you go to a physician for mental health, they are most likely going to prescribe some medication for you, because that is the model in which they are dealing with. Most physicians are not trained therapists, talk therapists. They're not going to do talk therapy with you. And if you go to a talk therapist, who is not a physician, they cannot prescribe medication for you. Okay? And you might be going for the same problem. You might be going for depression, for example. And seeing these people for depression, they're going to address the depression from different angles. Okay? And research shows that if you do take medication, you really should also be doing talk therapy. Because talk therapy, medication might stabilize your mood and help with your mood and stuff, but talk therapy is the thing that gets you through. It's the thing that changes how you address things. So taking a multi-factored approach to healing, I think, is a good strategy. So when clients come to me and they say, I've got this issue that I'm concerned with, I've got this issue that I'm concerned with, the first thing I always tell them is that shamanic healing is not a replacement for medical care or therapy. It is an addition. And what we are doing is we're setting up the spiritual conditions under which you heal. All healing is essentially self-healing. That's important. Let me repeat that. All healing is self-healing. If I break my arm and I go to the hospital, the doctor might set the bone, and the doctor's going to put a cast on my arm. The setting the bone and the cast are not healing the bone. They're not mending the bone together. They are creating the condition under which the bone pieces can mend together. Now in shamanic healing, when I'm addressing spiritual components of dis-ease or discomfort or illness or whatever we want to label it, I'm addressing that part of the person, but also helping them to build a powerful support system that creates the conditions under which they can heal. And I will give you one example, but I mean, obviously I've been doing this for years, and so I have lots of examples from lots of my clients, but I'll talk about one specifically because I don't generally talk about my clients too much, but this happens to be my daughter, and so it's okay. Now my daughter's 15, and so I don't just do work on her. I always ask her permission, or I would always ask her permission if there's something for me to do. So as I said, she, in school, she wound up with a bacterial and viral infection. She was miserable. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She had, fever, sore throat, all this stuff. It took a lot of testing to figure out what she had because it was two different things. They couldn't give her any medication other than ibuprofen. They couldn't give her antibiotics for the bacterial infection because of the viral infection, and she was pretty miserable. She was pretty miserable, and I felt for her because obviously I'm her. I feel for anybody, but I'm also her dad, and I feel really close to her, and I don't want her to be suffering. So I talked to her. She was staying with her mom at the time. She wasn't here, and I called her up and I said, if you would like, I would be happy to do a shamanic journey for you. And she said, well, what will that do? And I said, I can't promise that it will do anything, but many of my clients, when I work with them, feel better, during the session, immediately after the session, and then it helps them get better more rapidly. And she said, listen, do it. I'll do anything at this point. I think if I said, I'm going to come over to your house and wave a chicken over your head, then she would have been fine with that, as long as it had the promise of helping her out. She was, like I said, she was very miserable at the time. So, I journeyed for her. I did a healing session for her remotely. And I talked to her later on, an hour or two later, and she said, I feel better. I haven't felt this good in a while, and I feel better. Now, I cannot take credit for that because I don't know. And I also don't take credit for healing work anyway. When I do a healing session with somebody, it is spirit that does the work, and then the person is healing themselves. But she did get instantaneous relief, relatively instantaneous relief, that coincided with that same session. And I will give you yet another example. So I have a very good friend who is a practitioner that was getting knee surgery done. And, this is an older person, and they have a certain amount of recovery time that the surgeon tells them it's going to take you this long to recover. And she was fortunate. She knows a lot of other practitioners, and she had some people doing shamanic healing work on her during the surgery and after the surgery. And she went back for her checkup, for her whatever, how many weeks checkup. And the surgeon was astounded by how quickly she had healed. It was like nothing he'd ever seen before. So again, the shamanic healing work that these people were doing were creating spiritual conditions that were allowing her knee to heal. The shamanic work that I did for my daughter was creating conditions under which her body could reject these infections and she could feel better. Okay, I don't, I don't take credit for it other than I'm doing the journey. I'm allowing my helping spirits to work through me. And that's a kind of a big difference with shamanic healing. So there's always the question then that, is this actually doing anything, or is this placebo? Is it just, because placebo is a thing, we all know about it. You give somebody a sugar pill and you tell them it's medicine, or even if you tell them it might be a placebo, a certain percentage of people will get better. And the answer to that is complicated. One is it almost doesn't matter. If we're doing something and there is idiopathic healing, I don't know if that's the right word, but there's mind-body healing coming out of some process that we're doing, dividing that up into like 25% of that is the spiritual work and 15% of that is that doesn't matter that much. But to me, it is not just placebo. It goes well beyond what we would expect from the placebo effect, numbers-wise. But also, when I'm working with a client who hasn't told me what's going on with them, and my helping spirits indicate, oh, this person has polycystic ovary syndrome, and we do some work and I come back and I go, oh, I just have to ask you a question. Do you have, PCOS? And they're like, yeah, I didn't tell you that. So there are things that are happening that indicate to me that it is beyond placebo. And this is not something I would be doing if I did not have full faith and belief in its effectiveness, in its ability to help create the change that people need for spiritual healing. The other thing that I've seen, and again, placebo has a certain level effect, but I have seen actual mechanical change in people's bodies that I could not explain away simply by a mental process. So for an example, somebody with, joint issues that healed, and healed, I don't want to make this sound like it's a normal thing. There's not much that's abnormal, but that this is the most common thing. But sometimes there is spontaneous, what I would call like spontaneous miraculous healing. That's not the norm. Usually the healing process takes longer. But I've worked with people who had sort of like a frozen shoulder that all of a sudden started to move and released, and people who had a really bad infection with a fever and all this stuff, and it went away right afterwards. And so there are things that are happening that, to me at least, seem well beyond what could be expected by placebo. And even if I look at the numbers and the people that I work with and that sort of thing. So on a physical level, shamanic healing can cause change. Now, these systems that we work with, right? So one way to think about them is if I have a physical issue, the shortest way to get to that issue is through the physical plane, right? If I have a cut on my finger, the easiest way for me to take care of that would be to bandage it physically, as opposed to, and yes, you can hypnotize somebody and get bleeding to stop. I've seen that as well. The mind is incredibly powerful, but it's just easier to wrap a Band-Aid around my finger. But you can do both. I can wrap a Band-Aid around my finger, have somebody do a hypnotic thing with me to get the healing to happen and reject infection. And then I could have somebody do some spiritual healing on me around the trauma of the pain, or, something. Right? So I could use all of those things. So in shamanic healing, we work at multiple layers of the human self. So most often, unless you're working with somebody who is a healer, an indigenous healer, as part of a tribe, they might be giving you like herbs and things, giving you some physical stuff to affect your physical body. I don't do that. I'm not an herbalist. I'm not a licensed medical professional, so I'm not going to do that. But there are people who do that in the context of their cultures and their training. So they're going to work at that level, the level of the physical body. Now you also have an energy body, or the etheric body. And that is where we find things like the acupuncture meridians. And this is the level where things like Reiki and lots of energy healing work. Now, shamanic healing will also affect the energy body. A lot of the work that we do is beyond that, but there are certain things that we'll do that directly interact with and affect the energy body. The energy body is the closest spiritual body in frequency and distance, however you want to conceive of that, to the physical body. So energy body work tends to affect the physical quicker than other types of work, but it's not quite as deep. Okay, sort of explain. And so then a lot of shamanic healing happens at the level of the soul body. Some people also call that the astral body. Again, these are kind of artificial separations, that there are like these distinct bodies out there, but it's just a way of thinking about it. It's just a model of thinking about this. So that is a layer that's more removed from the etheric body, but that's where we carry things like trauma and past life stuff and ancestral wounds, and all kinds of stuff is carried around at that level. And so the shamanic work that works at that level, things like soul retrieval, ancestral healing, parallel life work, all kinds of stuff. The shamanic healing that works at that level is very deep. So when we go to heal trauma, now when you have trauma, and I'm not talking about physical trauma, but mental, emotional, psychological trauma, we know now that there is a mental process that happens clearly, but that a lot of trauma is stored in the body as well. So there's a physical process, but then there's a model where it's stored in the soul. So in modern psychological terms, we might talk about the fractured self, the fracturing of the self. And in shamanic terms, we're talking about something called soul loss, where a part of ourself gets broken off during trauma and needs some help to like come back. And a little part of us is like, it's almost like a little version of us that's frozen in time. And, a great deal of healing can happen when we bring that part back and our energy is restored, our connection to our self is restored, we dissociate less, things like that. We can be much more in touch with our body when that happens. And when that happens, there can be a tremendous amount of healing. Very much so, we'll see that at the sort of psychophysical, emotional level. So, lots of people with trauma, have emotional stuff or dissociative stuff, or, even attentional stuff. Trauma has a really, really broad effect on the individual, but even physical effect, right? So after soul retrieval, I will tell my clients that you'll feel something. Soul retrieval is a pretty big thing, and there will be some shift that will happen immediately, but expect it to fully integrate. Expect it to take up to 6 weeks to fully integrate. because this is very deep healing, and for it to bubble up, for that condition, that spiritual condition, to bubble up and affect the other systems and to be integrated into the other systems takes time. So if you think about, if you have some kind of infection, for example, and the doctors, a bacterial infection, the doctors give you antibiotics. You might have to take a course of antibiotics over 7 days, and they will instruct you to take the full course of antibiotics to give your body time to get that in, to reject the infection, to start fighting the infection off on its own. And the antibiotics are, yes, killing off the infection, but they're really providing, the backup that your body needs to start fighting that infection. And so that takes time. It's the same thing. If you break your arm and they put a cast on your arm hasn't healed yet. You need 6 weeks or however long it takes. I broke my arm when I was in high school. A freshman in high school. I don't remember. I think it was 6 weeks. It took to heal that it was in a cast. So it's going to take time. So very frequently people will want, and I understand wanting that, this instantaneous miraculous healing. And if I could do that, if anybody could do that, if anybody was capable of guaranteeing instantaneous miraculous healing to anybody they worked with, they would be doing it. I would be doing it. I would be doing nothing but that. I would be working in cancer wards across the country, and B, they would become a billionaire overnight. I would do it for free, but I could, if I could wave my hand and heal anybody instantaneously, I absolutely would. But that's not really how it works. And sometimes that happens. And it's wonderful when that happens, but you can't expect or rely on that. So I always tell clients who come to me with some kind of physical, mental, or emotional issue, the work that I do with you is not a replacement for medical treatment or therapy. Don't stop doing whatever you're doing, even if you feel great after our session. I would hate for somebody, say, who's diabetic to suddenly say, I feel great, I'm going to stop taking my insulin. Don't do anything like that without checking with your doctor first, okay? The shamanic healing is not a replacement for medicine. The only reason it was used in place of medicine in places is because it was used in places where there were no doctors and in times when there were no doctors. The other place that it can be extremely helpful is sometimes when medicine fails for a long period of time. And I know people, a big one around here where I live, and in other parts of the country, is Lyme disease. People have chronic Lyme, and if you don't know anything about Lyme, it is so insidious. It is a mosquito-borne disease, not a mosquito-borne, tick-borne disease. And the ticks are carried on mice and deer and dogs and all kinds of stuff. And you can get bit and not even know it and can get infected with Lyme disease. If you have chronic Lyme, meaning you didn't catch it up front and take the course of antibiotics that they give you, it is very, very difficult to get it out of your system. It can take years, and many, many people are misdiagnosed for years. I know people who are like, this is idiopathic, meaning it's all in your head. They were told. They went to neurologists, they thought they had MS, they thought they had this, they thought they had that. And finally, and the Lyme disease tests suck. They all suck. Once in a while, they're okay at picking up Lyme disease. But, if you have Lyme, it can be very difficult to diagnose and detect. So, I know lots of people who have turned to shamanic healing with chronic Lyme. This isn't to say that they can stop taking a course of treatment, but very frequently with things like that, where medicine just isn't treating them. They're going to doctor after doctor after doctor, and nobody's diagnosing them, nobody's treating them. That is kind of the only time when it's an alternative to medicine, when you are not getting what you need. And I would still recommend trying to get what you need from modern medicine. I'm not, in no way, shape, or form am I giving anybody any advice about when or when not to see a doctor, other than keep seeing your doctor. Get as much medical help as you can and advocate for yourself in healthcare, because, there are great doctors out there, but there are a lot of doctors out there who don't listen to their patients. And that is a very serious problem with our medical system today. So, long story short, I fully believe that shamanic healing works. I believe that the effect is beyond placebo. I believe that it has strengths. It has certain strengths. We are made up of multiple components. That includes many spiritual components and spiritual systems that are as complicated as, and even more so than, our physical systems. I believe that all of these systems overlap and affect each other. My body affects my mind affects my spirit affects my body spirit affects my mind, etc., etc. So, if shamanic healing is something you're considering, you should be able to talk to the practitioner that you're considering, at least over email, have a conversation with them. They should be really open and honest about what you can expect, what a session is like, what the costs are, how long you might have to see them, what their training is. There's all kinds of things I would ask if I were going to a practitioner up front. And they should be really, really open and good about answering your questions. And I try to be. When people contact me and ask me questions, I try to be as transparent as possible. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this was because I am currently going through a little bit of a sickness. I had a pretty bad cold, thought it might have been COVID at the beginning. Looks like it's not. I've tested twice. But I'm getting better pretty rapidly. And I'm doing, in part, I'm taking my vitamins and all that stuff, but in part, I'm doing spiritual work as well to make sure that I'm supported in that way. And my recovery has been pretty rapid. And I have no idea what it would be if I didn't do the spiritual work. So that is an unscientific way of saying, I believe this is working for me. And I believe it has worked for other people that I've done work on behalf of, and many, many, many people I know. Most of the practitioners I know came to shamanism as clients first. Not all, but most of them came as clients first. So with that, I will wrap up, and I hope you are healthy, and I hope you're staying healthy, and I hope you're happy, and I will talk to you very soon. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we'll talk to you real soon.